welcome to episode 3 of Aftershock Online. Very excited today to have our guest, Skyler Irvine, here with us. Before we get started, I'm going to give a quick bio on Skyler, and then I'm really excited about some things we're going to talk about today. So, Skyler is a serial entrepreneur and investor, author of How to Leverage Your Real Estate Business with Facebook, featured in Inc., The Street, MarketWatch, and Forbes, founder of Why Arizona and Renzler One Podcast Network, host of the Skyler Irvine Show and Ask Skyler Live. Skyler, welcome.
Josh, thanks for having me. You're excited. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. I've known you for a little while through different ventures, and I guess just a quick fun story. You started a golf league a few years ago, and I happen to be one of the few people that you invited into it, and now I run that golf league, and it's been a lot of fun. My handicap's been lowered, which isn't always good for winning things, but are you still playing golf at all?
I'm not, which is the reason that I'm glad you inherited it. I think I ran it for 2 years and said, kind of threw my hands up and said, I can't do this anymore. We keep having kids. We keep getting busier. And 4 or 5 hours off on the weekends got to be too much for me. So hopefully I can come back to it in maybe 16 years or something.
Right. Well, and you mentioned kids. You've got 2 girls, and then you've got another one on the way.
That's correct. Yes, very soon.
Wow, that's crazy. What's that like? What's family life like right now?
It's the best. I mean, it takes up every moment of free time we have, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And it's funny because I talked to someone who is a very busy person. They're about to have their first kid, and it's just, you think you're busy now, wait until you have kids, but you also become so much more productive because you just have to. And you think you might be busy, and then all of a sudden you're able to get more done in less time when kids come. And I think just throwing more kids in that, hopefully it just keeps happening that way.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun. I have 3 kids myself, and you're right. You learn how to get super productive really fast. One of the things I learned from you, because I've been watching some of your stuff for the last couple of years. You put out great content. But I think this was maybe after one of the golf outings. You were talking about a book, The Miracle Morning, and how you were getting up early, and I watched a few videos on it. Tell me a little bit about that. I mean, what really changed when you started getting up early, and how did you start doing that?
I wish I was still doing it, but that's a good question. It was one of those things where I might tell myself something, and when I say it out loud, it almost triggers something to where, okay, now I've got to do that. And one of my things was, like, at one point I heard someone talking about being vegan, and I thought, well, I could never not eat meat. I love meat. Once I said that, it kind of triggered this thing where I was like, okay, well, now I've got to go a month without doing this, and just because I know I can, I need to stop saying those things.
Right.
So we ended up doing 2 months, and it was just one of those moments. Same thing kind of happened when I thought, well, I've never been a morning person, or I can't get up early. I was like, all right, well, now you've got to do this. And committing to something like the Miracle Morning was very interesting because I kind of give you this outline of just follow these steps. And by following those steps, it really changes a lot of the rest of your day. And it's easier to basically get more done, especially as a father, as a business owner, before 8 a.m. because you've got those less distractions. So if you're starting the day by 9 a.m., you're heading to the office, you've already accomplished a lot of like your major tasks by getting up early, following a certain amount of guideline. Whatever happens throughout the rest of the day, it feels like you succeeded because in those first couple hours, you followed these certain guidelines that you set out for yourself.
Right. No, and it's huge. Getting a good start to your morning makes a huge difference, and especially doing more before most people have even woken up. So right now, you are the founder of RenzlerMedia, which is doing amazing things. Before we get into that, you were in real estate for a long time, in a lot of different real estate ventures. Tell me a little bit about that career, what you got into it, and what made you move into RenzlerMedia?
So when I first got into real estate, I've told this story before, but I had been basically that movie Up in the Air with George Clooney where he goes around firing people. I was working at a company, and they had a company like that come in and lay off everyone. At that time, it was my first job out of college. I moved home. I was depressed. I felt like I had failed. I was in debt. I was broke, living with my parents, 24 years old. And it was kind of this epiphany for me where thought I had done everything I was supposed to do. I went to school, got good grades, got into college, graduated college, got a job. I hated it. I was miserable. I wasn't good at a big company. And when I got fired, it was like I did everything I was supposed to do and I still failed. So why not try to do something I want to do? Because if I fail, like I'm already here, I'm already at rock, like I could just move back in with my parents, or I'm still living with my parents. So I took a lot of the savings that I had and I invested in some of these real estate investment courses. And along the way, there was someone in one of these classes that was basically wasn't the instructor, but was answering all the instructor's questions. I was like, God, this person really knows what they're talking about. So at the lunch break, everyone went up to go ask her a question. I'm waiting in line, kind of waiting to get my turn. And finally, I get up there and I say, how many of you invested in? I mean, you know the answers to all of these things. I mean, you're just killing it. She's like, well, I haven't started yet. I'm not ready. And I was like, if you're not ready, when are you ever going to be ready? So I kind of left that whole course thinking I'm just going to do this because you're never really ready until like after you've done it. So I just set out and I bought my first property and it became a profitable endeavor. And it was just kind of like this aha moment where, wow, this works. It's not just something I read about. It's something that actually works. There's something magical about getting that first chunk of change that isn't directly from an employer, like a salary or a paycheck. And the ability to kind of create value where there wasn't value before really spoke to me. And I went all in on real estate to where I was like, I'm going to buy a bunch of these houses. And this was in 2008, 2009. And when I went to get that first property, when I purchased it, I had to get it insured. They wanted to insure it for $120,000. I said, no, I only paid $67,000 for this. Like, what? There's a mistake here. And they said, no, if the house were to burn down, it would cost $120,000 to rebuild the house. And I was like, I can buy a house for less than what it costs to build? That doesn't make any sense. Wow. And once I realized that, I was like, okay, eventually the market's going to come back. I don't know how long. It might take 10 years. It might take 20. But no one's going to build a new house until all of these are gone because it's not profitable. So it made a lot of sense to me, even though the world was saying it was a bad idea. Friends and family were telling me I was making a mistake. Don't buy houses. And the market just started coming back. And I got to a point where I couldn't borrow any more money. So I started borrowing hard money at 18%. And that would only work on short-term deals. So I could, instead of buying properties I was going to rent and hold for a long time, I'd buy one, fix it up, get a renter in there, and then sell it to an investor who didn't want to do the work, but they wanted to buy rental properties. So I would sell basically ready-made rental properties with a tenant in there, and this is a cash flow rental property. So that was a profitable business until Blackstone came in one day, and they had a $2 billion portfolio of cash just to buy houses, and the prices just doubled overnight. And I was like, okay, the market's changed. I can't make these margins anymore. I've got all this experience selling houses. I've got this business. The market's coming back. People are going to want to buy and sell houses again. And that's when I partnered with Daniel Brown, where I was looking, if I could find a buyer's agent, we could form this company and treat the real estate process like a business. And I just didn't have the time to sell or to show houses. My wife had our first child at the time, and my timing had changed. So when I partnered with Daniel Brown, it was like, okay, you show the houses, I'll list them and market them. And we built that business following that model. And what was really helpful for us was we were a new company that didn't have a big budget like some of these big real estate companies, but on Facebook, we could look huge. We didn't spend a lot of money on a website. We didn't have a huge office building, but we figured if we could dominate on Facebook, we could just carve out that niche for us. And we did it all through like organic growth and traditional marketing and branding techniques. And after spending years just on that marketing side, I essentially hired myself out of the sales side. We grew, we hired more people, we had employees, and I was doing the marketing and listing full time. Danny and I got to this point where it's like, you know what? I want to spin this off and do what I'm doing for our company for other companies. I know there's better ways to market. I know there's better ways to brand. I built ours doing organic reach on Facebook. So we went from 7 million in sales in year one to 20 million plus in year two without increasing our ad budget at all. And we did it through just branding and marketing techniques utilizing social media. So that's been kind of my passion where it's like, all right, I'm going to take a year off, figure this out, and then spun essentially that division off and formed RenzlerMedia about a year and a half ago with the purpose of offering that as a service to other clients and not just in the real estate business.
Awesome. So now jumping into RenzlerMedia, you started that, and before we went on air, you were talking a little bit about starting again from the ground zero in a completely different vertical, a B2B model instead of a B2C. You know, what were some of the struggles that you learned from quickly in that process?
What I found interesting is when you leave an industry and go to a new industry, nobody cares about what you've done before, and you don't carry any of that momentum with you. And it was humbling, but it was also kind of exciting to say, okay, I've got to start at the bottom. I need to get my head a little bit smaller. All these things I've done before that have worked, nobody really cares about because I'm entering a new industry. So being in the industry and shifting and changing and learning along the way where I know this is valuable, but I still have to convince someone it's valuable or show them that it's valuable. And for me, what I loved about building my business through Facebook the way I did it is I didn't like door knocking. I didn't like cold calling. And in the real estate business, people looked at that as being lazy. But I also looked at it as being like extremely inefficient, where if I could call someone, that would take me an hour to get them on the phone and have a conversation. If I'm going door knocking, I can maybe knock on 10 doors in an hour and have conversations. If I could make one video and put it out online, well, I could reach hundreds of people in an hour, but over the next 365 days, I could reach thousands of people. And if the videos were good, I could reach even more. So in my mind, it just made a lot of sense, like buying a property for less than what it costs to build. It made a lot more sense. Well, if you guys are gonna be cold calling, I'm just gonna create valuable content that people wanna see, and I'll be able to reach more people in less time. And doing that as a business person where it's hard to get people to buy into new methods when you get really used to using your old methods. So that's been kind of the thing I've dealt with the most, but it's worked now when someone comes to my office to set up an appointment and talk about marketing. It's, okay, well, how did you hear about me? How did you meet me? And usually it's like, I saw one of your videos. And it's exactly, like, that's what we're doing. That's what we offer for others.
Right. And I know that you guys have had the documentation style of business, and I've gotten to know someone who on your team, Hoff, and it's been amazing to watch how well it has worked, because you're right. He told me the same types of stories, but talk about some of your customers now and how they're benefiting from your services, because you have a new product offering. So talk a little bit about that and then how they're benefiting from what you guys are doing for them.
Well, yeah, I'll go over it briefly, but when we started out, I had 5 things essentially that I knew would work for people. And in the first year, everyone defaulted to where most of our services were just in the video and podcasting space. So it made a lot of sense to, okay, here, even though we can do these other things, let's double down on just video and podcasting. And the way I see podcasting as being valuable is kind of treating it like this pillar of content, to where I don't have the time to put out a lot of content. My counter to that is the way our podcast works, for example, is I can sit down for a 45-minute conversation and my team generates a week's worth of content for me to share. So it looks like I'm constantly making and putting out stuff, but really I'm a busy business person myself. I don't have the time to be doing a lot of that stuff. We've built this system that allows us to put out content for others with very little time invested on their end. So I know, as being like when I was partnering with Daniel and we were doing real estate, it got to the point to really succeed at social media was a full-time job. And I realized that if you're trying to separate yourself as a business today, you either need to spend 8 hours a day on your marketing and social media, and then 8 hours a day on your actual business, or you need to either partner with someone that can, okay, I'll do this part, you do that part, or it's hiring an agency that says, okay, we do this full time, we get it better than anyone, let us do this for you, and then you just do what you do best, which is do your job. And that's why I kind of set out to create that agency, because I said there's gonna be value for this, because we're not selling services that we don't already do ourselves. And one of those things happens to be podcasting. A year, or I guess 18 months ago, I couldn't get anyone to start a podcast. So finally we said, okay, I'll start one, so that way we can show you the value of it over a year. And I thought it would take us a year to get to 50 episodes, and then we'd reevaluate and figure out what we wanted to do. The podcast has been one of the biggest things we've done, where most people think I'm just a full-time podcaster. In reality, it's just something I do an hour a week, and we just get a lot of content out of it and provide a lot of value to others. And that's been really spectacular. You mentioned the fact that we offer these services. I spent a year figuring out that podcasting space, what works, what doesn't work. We put that into a package to where, okay, now you can sit down, have your podcast, and then we'll produce a ridiculous amount of content for you to share across all your social media platforms, because we know how hard that is. We know how time consuming that is.
Yeah, and I've seen you guys do a great job of it, because if you're saying, an hour a week you're spending podcasts, well, I see Instagram posts, I see Facebook posts, and I see little snippets, little sizzle videos, and then obviously, the full one on YouTube or Facebook. And the fact that you're able to compound 1 hour into so much content is amazing. And that's really an important market for business people, whether it's a one-off solopreneur or a company that has 50 employees that's trying to put out content. The time is still always an issue. So I really like what you're doing there.
Yeah, it all comes back to like being super busy and being a parent. Like, we know those things. You have to become more efficient. Yep. So if you're already sitting down and capturing an hour's worth of a conversation, well, just maximize it as much as you can. I mean, I've got TJ here filming this as well, and we were here shooting some stuff just around the city. It's stuff that as a busy business person, you don't need to create a show that's super entertaining and trying to compete with stuff that's on Netflix. But if you're interviewing or having conversations about your industry with important people, capturing that on video and putting it out as content just makes sense to me. And instead of trying to convince someone like my mom, who is great and loves watching the things I'm doing, it's easier for me to just to put a podcast video on YouTube than to try to teach her how to download it on her podcast app. So instead of trying to just build one thing and get a huge following, it's, all right, just get in front of where people already are and try to maximize more width and depth in that case.
That makes sense. And I've heard you say this, basically, go to wherever you get your podcasting. And that's great because whether it's YouTube, Facebook, whether it's, Stitch or some of the podcasts, iTunes, all that, giving people the ability to download that information everywhere, make it easy.
We notice, just in marketing, you got to make it as frictionless as possible. So remove as many obstacles as possible as you can, any chance you get. Because if you've got to leave Instagram to click onto my webpage, to click somewhere else, and then load the podcasting app, I'm going to lose at least 30% of those people every step of the way. So just put the best information you have on Instagram, and if they see it, great. That's a win for me. They don't need to subscribe to anything.
Right. It's awesome. So let's talk about some of the tools in the last year that you have started to use, whether it's like a CRM, whether it's editing software. There's some tools that you really recommend for anybody getting into podcasting or really just marketing their business.
I mean, I'm a broken record when it comes to this, but I think Facebook and Instagram is all the tools that you really need. For me, editing and all that stuff, I think the one thing I try to get away from, and it's a question that I get asked the most, is what equipment we use for filming or podcasting and whatever it happens to be. And you don't really hear me until you try it yourself, but the equipment doesn't matter because every time you add that new tool or that new piece of equipment, now you have to learn how to do that so well so where it doesn't distract you from doing the other things you're trying to do.
Makes sense.
So for you were smart. You said, I want to do a podcast. I'm going to just go into a podcasting studio where they'll handle it all. If you had to learn how all of these things work as well, it makes it so much harder to do every single episode. It makes it harder to start that first one because you don't think you're ready. Or if you're worrying about the audio levels while you're also trying to have a conversation with me, I'll feel that you're distracted and then maybe you won't feel like it's good at audio or you're worrying about something not recording. I think it's the same way with a lot of tools to where if you aren't able to master them quickly, it gets tougher and tougher. And you also ignore the stuff that's just right in front of your face. And I'll use like IGTV, for example. Instagram launches this new, potentially a new platform. Right now it's a feature. And everyone's rushing to say, what's this going to be? What do I need to do? How do I use it for my business? And while that's great, sometimes you don't need to go to the next thing when the thing today is still working and YouTube is still working and Facebook video is still working. And it's okay not to be overwhelmed and say, I'm going to wait and see what IGTV looks like before I go in on it. And I'm still going to utilize the things that are working today. And I guess I'm just the worst person to ask those tools questions to because I don't think they're as important as just kind of getting started.
Well, and that's a great point because I talk to my customers about this all the time. Don't get shiny object syndrome. They'll say, hey, I saw there's new Facebook Messenger ads, a year ago. They're talking about IGTV, Snapchat a couple years ago. Oh, should I be doing this and this and this? Listen, here's what's working. Here's what's getting you leads and how you are getting new business into your door. Yes, we'll try that stuff, but we're not going to take away from what we're currently doing because that would be spraying. It would be shiny object syndrome. So I always discourage not trying new things, but in lieu of taking away from what you're currently doing.
Yeah, my belief is if you had all the time and resources in the world, do everything, but you don't. Okay, so then work backwards. What do you have the time and resources for? Okay, great, master that. Do you have more time and resources? Great, now master this one. Pick the ones that have the most value to you right now. And for 80% of businesses right now, across the board, it's Instagram and Facebook still. And then LinkedIn is doing some neat stuff, and Twitter's coming back. What's going on IGTV isn't going to make or break your business right now. And getting distracted by the new stuff is very easy to do. It's why there's always a new diet fad and there's always a new get-rich-quick scheme is because you want to look for things that might be shortcuts, but if you're just putting out a video every single day on Facebook, a year from now, you're going to be in a better position than if you hadn't done that. Yeah. And if you know that, like, what's really stopping you from just doing that? And a lot of it's not having it be perfect from day one.
Awesome. I want you to expand on one point you were talking about. You're talking about with Facebook. One thing I hear all the time is businesses aren't on Facebook. How do you market B2B? Because I think it's a huge thing. You should be marketing B2B on Facebook. What do you tell someone that says, business people aren't on Facebook?
So I don't think there's one size fits all solution for everyone across the board. And anytime I see like a top 10 thing every successful person does before 5, it's like, ignore that stuff. Nobody does all the same stuff. There's a lot of ways to be successful. So with the business, it kind of depends on what the industry is. But a good example was someone told me that they were trying to sell software to doctors. And it's like, okay, well, doctors are super busy. They're not really on social media a lot. How do you get to them? And it's like, okay, well, who's the problem actually solving? And it was for the receptionists and for the nurses that were running the internal systems. Mm-hmm. So it's like, great, well, why don't you just create custom video content that says the 10 things you wish your doctor knew about blank, and show the video about how someone is stressing with this problem and how it's solved and how easy it is, make it fun, make it light, and then target nurses in the specific area that you're trying to reach, or people that work at doctor's offices. Because if the doctor has 3 people in his office say, hey, have you seen this video? That's going to have so much more of an impact than if they were just to come across the video themselves. And that's just one little way to kind of get in front of a professional, but it's something that happened recently that we've seen actually work. And by creating content that doesn't feel like a commercial, but it's very hyper targeted to where this content is made specifically for nurses that work in a certain area in a specific field. And then with Facebook ads, you're able to target just those people or spouses of or friends of. And that way the friend is sending it to the nurse, is sending it to the doctor. And it might sound expensive, but if you're doing a blanket ad of targeting everyone in Scottsdale within 5 miles, you're reaching thousands of people that don't care at all about what you're doing. Right. If you're creating content that's specifically for this audience, and then you're actually putting in front of that audience, you'll end up spending less money and have a way higher reach and impact. And it's one of those things that a lot of people know exists. It just sounds too complicated for a small business owner to really buy into right now.
Right. No, but by simplifying that for them, really going back to, hey, who's your audience? All right, how do we reach those audiences? And then, boom, this is a platform that you can target anything you really want with Facebook. And they're making some changes that'll make, I don't want to say more difficult, but there's going to be some changes that come up. But it's great to be able to target, nurses or even doctors or lawyers, depending on, what they're putting in their profile.
Yeah, and a lot of it's not just targeting them, but creating the content for them specifically. I think the mistake is a car company, for example, will take their Ford truck commercial and put it on Facebook and then promote it and wonder why it's not working. And the value of Facebook is, no, create a specific car commercial for a specific audience that solves a specific pain point, and then target just those people. And that's where the real value comes from. We don't just put like blanket commercials or my About Me video on Facebook and like, why aren't people liking and commenting on it? And it's like, well, if it's boring stuff, it's not Facebook's fault. It's really, the content really matters.
Yeah. So I'm going to totally pivot here. And one of my favorite things I've seen you do is your, what's my Renzler video. Yeah. Talk to me just a little bit about the thought process putting that in, because that was obviously a very specific audience, very specific message. I'd love to know kind of how you came up with that.
It seemed obvious to me almost, or for anyone that's familiar, it's basically, when's the last time you read an About Me page on someone's website? And meanwhile, on your own About Me page, you've probably spent way too much time perfecting it. And those two things, to me, it's one of those things. It's like buying a house for less than what it costs to build. These things just stand out to me where it's like, that seems very inefficient. What would it be like if you could create some type of content that explained who you were, what you did, and why you did it, that people would actually share with someone else? Because to me, that type of ROI is infinite. If it has the ability to get someone to want to share it, then that you can't really put a price on that, because it could reach a ton of people without you spending that much money on it. Yeah. So putting more effort into the creative and basically telling my story. And I realized that if you watch me on video for 30 seconds, you'll have a better idea of who I am than if you read 10,000 of my books. It's just, there's something about video. You can see the mannerisms. You can like or dislike me. I mean, a lot of times I'll put people off because of who I am, but it also prevents them from coming in my office to have a meeting with me. So now I have less meetings, where my sales pitches now are people coming in, they've seen enough about me, they come in to sign with me. I'm not selling anymore, I'm not converting, I'm not trying to convince someone to do something that they don't want to do. And I do that through video. So we wanted to create basically an About Me page that summarized who I was to someone that was just being introduced to me for the first time. And that's what that What's Your Renzler was basically announcing the company's birth and why I'm doing it and what my plans are for the next couple of years.
It's awesome. It was very well executed. I really enjoyed it. So, and that's, obviously that's what you do for customers now too, which is really great. Moving to something that I know you're really into, educating yourself and gathering information. Can you give me a couple of books that have really been game changers for you since you started Renzler?
I'll be honest. So I go through phases, and when I left my real estate career, essentially, and was taking a year off, I went all in on learning. And I was making a new video every single day on YouTube, and through trial and error, because I knew that this was going to be valuable, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet. So I wanted to just go all in on doing videos and learning everything I could. So books kind of took a back seat during that year. It was watching YouTube tutorials, learning, trying new things, pushing the limits. And since I've launched RenzlerMedia, my work life, my balance has gone out of whack. And this is something I've actually talked about before, where when you're building a company, like, you can't really have work-life balance because you've got to put a lot of extra effort into one thing, so other things take a back seat. And for me, I would be open. Like, my health took a back seat, my self-educating, reading books, times to do that, because if I've got a free minute, I'm spending it with my kids. If I'm not doing that, I'm trying to build this business because we're doing a lot of different things at once. Along the way, I mean, some books that have been very impactful to me, because I definitely want to answer this question. I don't feel like I'm dodging it, but I think there's just, with what I'm doing, and I wrote a book on Facebook myself, and I'll tell you that you can't be an expert in these things anymore, because tomorrow I'll wake up, download the Facebook app because it has an update, and everything's changed. So those tactics don't work, but branding works long term. The marketing tactics change all the time, but branding works all the time. People know of Nike right now if they didn't make another commercial for the next year. But something like Allbirds, which is a brand new shoe company built entirely on the back of Instagram and Facebook ads, they came into existence utilizing these tactics. Now they want to turn into an actual business and a brand. They're going to have to do bigger and bigger things. Because of that, you can't really write a book on it because books take 18 months to go to publish. Yep. YouTube video tutorials are the new books, so to speak, and they're so much more effective, I think. And for me, depending on what you're trying to do, all the answers exist already. I just haven't gotten them out of a book. So as a book recommendation, stuff that's timeless would be Miracle Morning. I think is still great. The Richest Man in Babylon, I think everybody should read once a year. Has nothing to do with anything that's business related, but it will change your life if you implement those steps. So I would just stick with those two for now.
Awesome. And I didn't mean to pigeonhole you into books.
No, I definitely want to give a book recommendation because I love to read, but I'm reading a book. I'm reading about Chinese history right now. That's nothing to do with my career, but I'm still reading anytime I get. It's just it's not really effective to what I'm specifically doing now. I imagine it'll help me 10 years from now.
Fair enough. So what are you looking to get out of the Chinese book that you're reading? That's interesting.
I'll do things today that I know will help me eventually. And I know a lot about, I'm obsessed with history. I'm obsessed with economic history. I don't know a lot about China and what China's been through over the last 600 years. And learning about where they've come from gives me a better idea of what's going on today. I know if you go back and watch movies from the early 80s, everyone was afraid of Japan taking over the world. And I think we're always looking for a big bad. And right now it's China. But in reality, China's dealing with a lot of issues that we don't talk about. So it's easy to fear China and fear them and fear their economy. And I imagine 15, 25 years from now, we'll be doing the same thing with India. And we'll be looking back at China like we did with Japan, just as the way that things kind of ebb and flow.
Awesome. So an interest basically into history and the culture of now and looking at how it might change.
Yeah, studying history lets me understand today more and put things in perspective, where we always think right now things are happening that have never happened before, or it's different now, or it's harder for us. Putting things in perspective and looking back and reading history helps you kind of predict, like, don't get too high when things are great, don't get too low when things are down. We've been through some bad stuff before.
Absolutely. There's always an ebb and flow. And my wife's uncle, he's been a mentor of mine he's 81, but for many years he's worked with me. And he was in real estate, commercial real estate. And he was like, I can't even tell you how many times I was able to buy the same property that I sold 10 years ago because I knew, there was going to be another cycle. There was going to be another downturn. And paying attention to that stuff makes a lot of difference. So we're going to move into the last part, which is the Aftershock takeaways. And you sent me a few. So I'm going to read them off, and I'd like you to expand on those. Okay. First one, just get started.
This one is obvious, and it's funny because I had some messages come in today, and I was showing them to TJ, but I'll put out content, same stuff over and over again, and it's because things keep coming up. It doesn't really matter the equipment you buy if you want to start a podcast. Start the podcast because building the habit of doing regularly is the hardest part. So if you want to do a podcast, the most important thing you could do is build a habit that you can put one out at least once a week or at least twice a month. Build that habit out first and then start adding to it. Make it as easy as possible to succeed and then add to it. If you make it too hard up front, there's all these things that will keep it from going on. And a lot of that has to do with, well, I'm an average person who's busy with my business, and all of a sudden I want to start a podcast that's going to go out once a week, but I'm going to buy a new microphone, new software, and all this other stuff. And if you're too busy for the other stuff, you're never going to get to the point where you sit down for an hour and read the manual on all this equipment. So do one on your phone. You can use an Anchor app. You can use all these different apps, just record it. And then if you do one once a week for a couple months and you say, hey, it'd be cooler if it sounded better, then you're more invested in improving it and making it a little bit better and better. So for me, getting started is just don't wait for a certain thing to happen to get started. Get started now and then improve it over time.
Awesome. Next one. Equipment doesn't matter.
I mean, I'm a broken record at this point, and it's because it comes up a lot. Like I'm telling you, and I know when I was making a video every single day, I was following Casey Neistat, who's probably the best world-known vlogger there is, and he always talked about how the equipment doesn't matter, just shoot with what you have in your pocket. And I always thought, well, like, easy for you to say, you're just the best vlogger ever that has all this nice equipment. It took me a year of doing it myself to realize that, yeah, sometimes you have really nice equipment, but if it's big and heavy, you can't take it with you. What's the point? Because you can't even capture what you want to capture anyway. So using your phone to capture something on video is better than not doing it at all. I had to go through the steps myself, so I have empathy for people that really don't hear me when I say the equipment doesn't matter. It's like, okay, but still, like, what should I buy? So I'm on this saying equipment doesn't matter, but I've also posted links to everything that we use, why I like it and why I don't like it. Because if you just need that little extra push, great, buy this because I used it for this. Don't do this because it doesn't help you do those things. But really, it doesn't matter as much when it comes to just getting started, building the habit of doing, and then starting to improve it over time. Trying to make it perfect from day one is just silly, where if you're trying to figure out exactly how much food you need to eat for the entire week, you probably won't stick to it that long. But if you just realize, I should eat a little bit better and I should walk around the block every morning before I go to work, that might not be the perfect strategy, but it's a lot better than not doing anything at all, because it makes it 6 months from now when you lost some weight to say, hey, I'd like to lose some more weight. How can I increase this? And then you start perfecting it as you go. Trying to have it be perfect from day one doesn't work.
Yeah, actually, one of my favorite quotes is something you said, and it's about perfection. What is that?
Probably perfection is impossible, but improvement is infinite.
Yeah, and there's so much wisdom in that.
And I put it up on the wall because it's just the easiest way of just saying, like, it doesn't matter, just get started, make your next one better, and then make your next one better. And along the way, you'll look back after 50 times and be like, wow, we've gotten a lot better. But if we were waiting for the perfect time, we might never ever started.
No, that's incredible. All right, so the third takeaway is focus on providing what people want, not just what you have to give.
I think that's a big deal, especially when it comes to sales, is creating something and trying to convince people to use it is such a waste of time versus listening to what they're asking for and then giving it to them. Where it's easier to change yourself than to try to change other people. And you're either going to be swimming upstream your whole life or just go with the current, and you're going to get a lot further if you go with the current. And there's nothing wrong with that. And maybe your product is perfect, but it's too early or it's too late or it's too expensive. Understanding that and then adjusting is how businesses stay successful over time. Like Instagram, like it started out where it was something about completely different that had a camera feature. Now it's one of the fastest growing social media platforms out there, and it was never a social media platform when it started. Knowing those things is, I think, extremely important, especially if you're creating something that you're trying to sell. Listen to what is in demand and find a way to provide that.
That's awesome. Awesome. Well, it's been great having you on.
Thanks for having me. This has been a blast. I love talking about myself. I could do this all day.
Absolutely. No, I think we could probably go on for hours, but I appreciate you having you on. So thank you guys for tuning in today to this episode of Aftershock Online. We'll see you in a few weeks, and we look forward to it.
Thank you, guys. Cool.